Look closely at your life as it stands right now and ask yourself this. If you were to lose your job tomorrow, how long could you truly last before you found yourself begging for help? Perhaps a week, maybe a month, or possibly a little longer if you have managed to save. But for the majority of people, those savings vanish quicker than they imagine. All it takes is a single medical bill, a sudden emergency, or an unexpected expense, and the so-called safety net evaporates completely. That is the harsh truth most people avoid confronting, because once money disappears, survival disappears along with it. And as survival slips away, respect follows swiftly behind. Suddenly you find yourself explaining and justifying your choices, apologizing for your circumstances, and asking for permission where you once acted freely. What you lose is not just comfort or stability. What you truly lose is your dignity. You can scream the truth as loud as you like, but no one listens. You can labor harder than anyone else, but you remain replaceable. Poverty does not simply strip you of options, it erases your very presence from the world. Now flip the perspective and look at the other side of the coin. With money, everything bends around you and adjusts to your will. You do not wait in lines. You skip them without question. You do not ask for permission. You determine who deserves access. Even your silence transforms into power, because people lean forward to listen when the wealthy choose to speak, and they bow even deeper when the wealthy remain quiet. This is precisely why you have been lied to from the very beginning by parents who told you to just be grateful, by teachers who insisted that money is not everything, by influencers who glorify minimalism while secretly cashing in on sponsorships, by politicians who claim equality while pocketing endless donations, and even by friends and family who shame you for dreaming too big because your ambition exposes the smallness of their own excuses. They want you to believe that money is greed, money is evil, and money does not matter, because once you accept that lie, you remain obedient, docile, and easy to control. But if you look closer at who truly builds wealth, you will see the banks profiting by lending out your savings, corporations multiplying every dollar tenfold, and governments printing debt while you struggle to pay your bills. The truth is that the wealthy do not work for money. They have mastered the art of making money work for them, and history has always proven that this has been the way of power. Caesar secured legions with gold. Alexander expanded his empire not with words but with overflowing treasuries, and even prophets needed wealthy patrons to spread their messages far and wide. Power has always bowed to money, and it always will. In the next hour, I will reveal why wealth must be pursued relentlessly, why mere savings will never be enough, why poverty is nothing more than chains polished and disguised as virtue, and why even justice and morality bend themselves to those who can afford to pay their price. Once you open your eyes to this truth, you will never again look at life the same way. The real question you must answer is this: will you continue living like everyone else, trapped by illusions, or will you do whatever it takes to step into true power? They will never tell you this openly, but understand this clearly. The possession of money is the possession of freedom itself, and to live without it is to willingly accept chains that have been dressed up and disguised as civility. In every city, within every family, and in every gathering where men silently measure one another, there exists an unspoken truth that determines whose words carry weight and whose words are dismissed without thought. Wealth dictates the gravity of a voice. Without it, brilliance is reduced to noise, and wisdom becomes nothing more than a faint whisper drowned beneath the clamor of those who can afford to purchase attention. With it, even mediocrity is elevated and praised as if it were genius, because instinctively, men bow before those who hold the keys to their survival. Look carefully, and you will see that those who denounce money the loudest are the very ones already enslaved by its absence, covering their impotence with bitterness disguised as virtue. A man who cannot command resources is inevitably forced into the theater of begging, no matter how politely or subtly it is staged. To acquire money, therefore, is not greed, it is sovereignty itself, the only true shield against dependence, humiliation, and silence. The truth is unkind, yet undeniable. Money is not merely a medium of exchange, it is the weapon that ensures respect even before a word is spoken. It becomes the fortress in negotiations, the silent ally that bends the pride of others. A wealthy man never enters a room alone, for his gold precedes him, clearing obstacles, softening resistance and silencing insult before it arises. Those who mock the necessity of wealth live in illusions, believing virtue or intelligence alone can suffice in a world that measures survival by possessions and accounts. They forget that even virtue demands bread, that even genius requires patronage, and that even the voices of prophets echo farther, only when supported by the wealth of those who understand the machinery of power. Without money, principles decay into the empty rhetoric of poverty, and without money, even the noblest heart is condemned to serve unworthy masters. Consider carefully how governments, armies, and even faith itself are bound to money. Thrones are not preserved by prayers alone, but by soldiers whose loyalty is bought in coin. Laws are not enforced by morality alone, but by courts and prisons maintained by budget. Temples do not rise to the skies solely by inspiration, but by donations and tithes collected from the pockets of believers. Every edifice of power, whether secular or sacred, rests on the unseen foundation of wealth. Thus, the man who does not secure his own fortune surrenders himself by default to the designs of others, reduced to a pawn in their strategies, waking each day in reaction to orders rather than issuing them, for he lacks the capital to enforce his will. Poverty is not simply the absence of money, it is the absence of leverage, and leverage is the essence of power. The weak console themselves by condemning wealth as corruption, but corruption belongs not to money itself, but to the hands that wield it. A blade in the grip of a coward is wasted steel, but in the grip of a commander it forges destiny, and so too with wealth. In the hands of a fool it dissolves into indulgence, but in the hands of a strategist it erects empires. Therefore the wise man does not reject money. The wise man studies how money moves, how it seduces, and how it reshapes the loyalties of men, for he seeks to acquire it not for mere pleasure or vanity, but for the authority it grants, the independence it secures, and the dominion it makes possible. To attempt life without this weapon is to live unarmed in a world where every man is hunting relentlessly for advantage. Those who exalt poverty as a virtue fail to grasp the nature of humanity itself, for even the charitable cannot extend generosity without first possessing, and even the spiritual cannot ascend without first being fed. History's stage bears witness that those remembered as great did not simply wield swords, ideas, or charisma. They wielded wealth. Alexander did not march without overflowing treasuries. Caesar did not conquer without funding his legions, and merchants and bankers shaped the destinies of republics as decisively as generals. Time and again, the flow of coin dictated the outcomes of wars before the first arrow left its bow. Even revolutionaries who thundered against the rich depended upon secret patrons to bankroll their causes, for to deny this is to blind oneself to the immutable law that governs all human affairs. Money is the bloodstream of power, and to command its flow is to command the very body of society itself. A man without wealth is condemned to forever negotiate from weakness, forever dependent on the mercy, generosity, or neglect of others. He may delude himself with the claim of freedom, yet invisible ropes bind him, debts, rents, wages, obligations that keep him crawling while he dreams of flight. To sever these ropes requires disciplined accumulation, the relentless pursuit of wealth, not as an end, but as the foundation upon which every higher aspiration rests. Love, art, philosophy, and faith all demand time and security, and both must first be purchased. The poet who scorns wealth may produce beauty, but he still relies on another's coin to eat. The man who claims disdain for riches while borrowing from friends is not noble but parasitic, masking need with false pride. Better by far is the ruthless honesty of one who declares, "I will acquire wealth at all costs," than the sanctimonious hypocrisy of one who cloaks envy and disdain. Thus the pursuit of money must never be timid, half-hearted, or conducted with shame. It must be relentless, disciplined, and defended from distraction, for every cost paid in pursuit now prevents a far greater cost in the future, the cost of subjugation, of humiliation, and of a life dictated by the will of others. Men without wealth will argue that money is not everything, and in a sense they are correct, but only because to them it is nothing, and they have never tasted the intoxicating reality of commanding destiny with a single decision that others must obey. Wealth is not everything, yet without it everything else becomes fragile, conditional, and perpetually at risk of being stripped away. The man who acquires money acquires security, and the man who secures security acquires the ultimate freedom, the power to shape his own existence. And yet, observe how effortlessly men betray their own ambitions by dismissing wealth as something secondary, soothing themselves with the delusion that talent, loyalty, or moral purity alone will be enough to carry them through life. Such illusions are convenient for rulers, for they pacify the masses into quiet servitude, ensuring that the poor remain docile while the rich grow more deeply entrenched in their dominance. The reality, however, is far less forgiving. Without money, even the most loyal ally can be cast aside the moment he ceases to be useful, because loyalty cannot fill a stomach, and morality does not pay a soldier's wage. Men are respected not only for their virtues but for their ability to enforce them, and enforcement requires resources. A virtuous pauper is regarded as little more than a curiosity at best, and forgotten as a shadow at worst, while a wealthy man, even if immoral, bends the course of events simply because men obey the hand that feeds them before they heed the voice that lectures them. Money, therefore, is not only an instrument of survival but the one language universally understood by both enemies and allies alike. Promises may be doubted, threats may be resisted, but gold rarely lies when coin is laid upon the table, uncertainty evaporates, and decisions are made without delay. Power without money is fragile, built on goodwill or illusion, while power backed by wealth is solid, for it purchases silence, commands loyalty, and fuels action in equal measure. A ruler with an empty treasury is no ruler at all, and a man who boasts of influence without wealth is merely a pretender whose empire collapses at the first demand for proof. If you wish to walk through life unchallenged, let your purse speak louder than your tongue, for men bow not to arguments but to abundance. This is why those who despise wealth so often find themselves cornered by those who do not. The ascetic may preach detachment, but his austerity still survives only through the generosity of wealthy patrons. The philosopher may proclaim virtue, but his words travel farther when printed by the funds of a backer. The rebel may curse the tyrant, but his revolution starves without benefactors willing to invest in chaos. Everywhere one looks, the necessity of money reveals itself like an inescapable shadow. To deny it is to deny the very laws that govern men, and to live without it is to live perpetually at the mercy of those who possess it. Understand this well. The acquisition of money is not greed. It is defense. Without it, a man stands naked before a world constantly seeking to exploit. Employers underpay him because he has no reserve. Lenders overcharge him because he has no alternatives. Friends grow impatient with the one who cannot contribute, and even family loses respect for the one who cannot provide. Poverty robs a man not only of comfort but of dignity, and once dignity is lost, everything else falls with it. Wealth, then, is not merely the shield against hunger and homelessness. It is the armor that preserves honor, and beyond that it is the great magnifier of choice. The poor man accepts only what is given, while the wealthy man selects what he desires. The poor man must endure insult in silence, for he cannot afford retaliation, but the wealthy man decides when and how he will answer, because his resources grant him freedom. The wealthy man may choose to answer or remain silent, for insult carries no cost to him, while the poor man lives in constant dread of sickness, disaster, and betrayal, because each has the power to destroy him completely. The wealthy man, however, prepares for all three and remains unshaken, and in this difference lies the true essence of freedom, not merely the absence of chains, but the power to move without fear of them. Money grants this power, and to neglect its pursuit is to forfeit liberty itself. Thus, when one speaks of acquiring wealth at all costs, it is not empty rhetoric but a commandment of survival, an acknowledgement that every sacrifice made in pursuit of wealth is a sacrifice made for autonomy. To toil, to delay pleasure, to endure the ridicule of those who mock ambition, all of these are prices worth paying, for their reward is sovereignty over one's own existence. He who hesitates, who compromises, who accepts the false comfort of small wages and the illusion of stability, learns too late that he has traded away his future for crumbs. Better the hard road toward riches than the easy road toward dependence, for only one ends in sovereignty. Yet wealth is not sought merely for its accumulation, but for the transformations it imposes upon the world around its possessor. With it, doors that remain closed to the poor swing open with ease, alliances form that would otherwise be impossible, and enemies once contemptuous are forced into civility. Wealth alters not only how a man moves, but how others move in his presence. His silence acquires gravity, His presence ignites anticipation, and even his absence presses upon the air like a weight. This is the invisible authority money creates, a magnetism that bends social reality without proclamation. Men mistake it for charisma, for brilliance, for destiny, but strip away the gold and watch how swiftly their reverence fades. This is why rulers hoard treasuries as zealously as generals sharpen their blades, for money sustains more than survival. It fuels expansion, conquest, and legacy. No city is raised on virtue alone, no dynasty preserved by goodwill. It is silver that lays the stones, gold that pays the architects, and wealth that secures heirs to carry a name forward. Even glory demands financing, for statues require sculptors, songs require patrons, and victories demand armies that must be fed, clothed, and armed. Without money, ambition collapses into deferred dreams, noble perhaps, but impotent and forgotten. With money, ambition hardens into enduring architecture, sturdy enough to outlast the men who imagined it. Thus, the pursuit of wealth is not only an act of self-preservation, but the means of etching one's will upon history itself. And yet many recoil from this truth, retreating into the comfort of illusions, clinging desperately to the belief that love, loyalty, or brilliance alone will sustain them, forgetting that all three withers without resources. Love demands a roof beneath which it can survive. Loyalty demands reward, lest it sour into resentment. Brilliance demands time, and time is purchased only by the freedom that wealth provides. Men who ignore this law soon awaken to the bitter discovery that their companions desert them, their passions consume them, and their brilliance is squandered under the exhaustion of daily struggle. Poverty reduces lovers into beggars, transforms friends into cynics, and condemns geniuses into failures. Only money prevents this slow decay, for it nourishes every other virtue, allowing them to thrive instead of wither. One must not believe that money alone guarantees greatness, for it demands discipline in its pursuit, strategy in its use, and caution in its preservation. As swiftly as it grants power, it can summon ruin to the careless, for many have risen through wealth only to fall by their own extravagance, mistaking possession for permanence. Wealth is not a loyal companion to be trusted blindly, but a beast to be mastered, a servant that will become a master if left unchecked. To acquire money at all costs is not to drown in indulgence, but to forge it into a tool, an instrument of freedom, authority, and influence. A fool who gains riches becomes their prisoner, but a wise man who gains riches transforms them into fortresses. Observe how even those who loudly proclaim disdain for wealth cannot escape its pull. The moralist rails against corruption, yet hungers for donations to fund his cause. The artist scorns commerce, yet begs for patrons to sustain his craft. And the ascetic denounces gold while thriving on the offerings of others. Every man is touched by money's hand, whether he admits it or not, and it is better to acknowledge this openly and master it than to live in denial and fall prey to those who already do. The pursuit of wealth, then, is not shameful but honest. It is an acknowledgement of the battlefield as it truly is, not as one wishes it to be, and in that battlefield, the man without arms is already defeated. Thus, the command remains unaltered. To acquire money at all costs is not greed but survival, not indulgence but sovereignty, not selfishness but the recognition that without wealth no dream survives, contact with reality. To lack money is to beg for existence, to endure dependence, and to watch one's dignity erode under the crushing weight of obligations, while to have it is to choose, to command, and to endure beyond the whims of others. He who grasps this truth seizes destiny, and he who rejects it surrenders to invisible chains he cannot even see. Within this understanding lies the foundation of power, and only the wise prove ruthless enough to embrace it without apology. Study carefully the behavior of men, and it becomes evident that wealth is the one force that alters how truth itself is received. A poor man may speak wisdom, yet it is doubted, dismissed, or ignored until another with resources repeats it, at which point it is exalted as revelation. This injustice is not a flaw in society, but its deliberate design, for men do not bow to truth. They bow to the vessel that delivers it, and that vessel is gilded in gold. Wealth consecrates words, magnifies gestures, and sanctifies authority. To possess money, therefore, is not simply to survive, but to decide what will be heard, what will be remembered, and what will be enforced. Those without it may be correct, But correctness without influence is a silent triumph that feeds no one. Consider, too, the subtle tyranny poverty imposes, for it forces a man into dependence on employers who drain his time in exchange for wages that barely sustain his existence. It ties him to creditors who grow fat upon his desperation, and it subjects him to rulers he cannot resist, for resistance itself demands resources he does not possess. This is the invisible yoke of poverty. A man may walk the streets freely, yet every choice he makes is shackled by what he can afford. He marries not for love but for necessity, he labors not from passion but for survival, and he speaks not from conviction but from fear of losing the meager sustenance he clings to. Such is the quiet humiliation of those who lack wealth, their entire existence dictated not by what they desire but by what they can endure. Thus the acquisition of money at all costs becomes the reclamation of agency, the severing of invisible chains and their replacement with command. With wealth, a man chooses his companions, his labors, his risks, and his pleasures. Without it, he is chosen for, labored upon, risked against, and denied pleasure altogether. To deny this is to deceive oneself into passivity. Only the wealthy man speaks with certainty, for certainty is not born from ideals but from the ability to enforce them, and enforcement demands resources. Words without money are mere pleas, but words backed by money are command. History teaches this lesson without mercy. Nations that bankrupt themselves, no matter how noble their causes, collapse into obscurity. Generals who march without funds find their soldiers deserting before the battle begins. Philosophers who write without patrons fade into dust, their manuscripts unread, their insights forgotten, and even prophets whose visions shook the heavens required treasuries, donations, or the wealth of devoted followers to carry their message across borders. Strip away the glamour of ideals, and beneath every triumph you will find the same engine humming. Money. It is not glorious, but it is undeniable, and he who denies it condemns himself to irrelevance. Yet wealth, once acquired, demands vigilance. To possess it is not an invitation to rest, but a command to prepare. For envy grows in the shadows around the successful, and every man who lacks will seek to extract from those who. The wealthy man must therefore learn to defend as well as to spend, to conceal as well as to display, and to invest as well as to preserve. Money is never static. It flows like water, and if left undirected, it erodes the very foundations of its own. Discipline must walk hand in hand with fortune, for without discipline, fortune inevitably flees. The fool who acquires riches without strategy becomes a slave to his appetites. But the wise man who acquires riches with discipline becomes the master of himself and of others. Therefore, when one declares the pursuit of wealth at all costs, it is not only a cry of ambition, but also an acceptance of endurance, a willingness to bear hardship now in order to avoid humiliation later. It is to carry scars in the pursuit of treasure, knowing that those scars will harden into armor, while poverty leaves nothing but open wounds that never heal. Wealth is not gained by accident, nor preserved by chance. It is seized by those who dare to place it above comfort, by those willing to pay today's price for tomorrow's dominion. At all costs means exactly this. The price of wealth, however steep, is always less than the cost of dependence, and within this recognition lies the seed of sovereignty. Money also holds the peculiar power to rewrite perception itself, transforming flaws into virtues and cloaking sins beneath a mantle of authority. A man without wealth who acts boldly is condemned as reckless, while a man with wealth who commits the same act is praised for courage. The silence of the poor man is mistaken for ignorance, while the silence of the wealthy man is exalted as wisdom. This distortion is no accident. It is the instinct of society to sanctify those who command resources, for men are drawn to strength and security, and nothing signals both more clearly than wealth. Thus, the possession of money reshapes not only external circumstances but the very narrative of identity. To acquire it at all costs is to seize not only power but also the privilege of being judged by laws different from those that bind lesser men. See how easily this principle reveals itself in daily life. A man of means may enter any room and establish its tone without uttering a single word. His attire, his posture, his reputation magnified by wealth, speak on his behalf. The same posture in a beggar would be ridiculed as arrogance, but in the rich man it is admired as confidence. Wealth transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary, the mundane into the enviable. It amplifies reputation beyond merit, and since men are forever guided by appearances, they mistake the glow of gold for the glow of greatness. Those who seize wealth at all costs, thus not only command obedience, but also mold perception itself, becoming architects of the illusions others willingly believe. Wealth also alters the terms of risk. For the poor man, every wager is made with his life, and a single mistake can destroy him entirely. But the wealthy man wagers with his reserves, and even in failure he remains standing ready to play again. This asymmetry explains why the ambitious cannot afford to remain poor. Poverty makes every risk fatal, and the fear of ruin paralyzes boldness. Wealth, by contrast, insulates and emboldens, multiplying opportunity. Where the poor man sees an impenetrable wall, the wealthy man sees a door he can afford to force open. Where the poor man hesitates, the wealthy man strikes, for he knows defeat is survivable. In this way, wealth is not merely protection but acceleration, turning hesitation into momentum and momentum into conquest. And consider further how money commands loyalty in ways nothing else can. Men may swear friendship, but hunger will force betrayal. They may take solemn oaths, but desperation will drive them to break them. Only wealth anchors loyalty, for it satisfies both need and ambition. Soldiers march farther for pay than for patriotism. Servants obey longer for wages than for devotion, and allies remain steadfast when profit is shared. A man without wealth may inspire for a season, but in time his followers drift toward richer masters, while a man with wealth secures loyalty that endures not because men are noble, but because they are pragmatic. To acquire money at all costs is thus to secure permanence in a world of shifting allegiances. Yet wealth, like a sword, must be wielded with art. Possession alone is not enough. One must know when to reveal and when to conceal, for too much display invites envy and attack, while too much secrecy breeds suspicion and fear. The wise man balances between the two, showing enough to command respect while concealing enough to ensure security. Wealth is both shield and bait, fortress and snare. The man who fails to master this duality becomes a target, but the man who understands it becomes untouchable. To acquire money at all costs is therefore not to flaunt it recklessly, but to refine it into a silent dominion, a power felt more than seen, respected more than spoken of. In the end, every man must choose whether to endure the humiliations of poverty or the struggles required for wealth. Both demand sacrifice, but only one leads to sovereignty. Poverty asks for dignity, freedom, and choice, stripping them away slowly until nothing remains, while wealth asks for labor, focus, and discipline, returning them tenfold as command, respect, and independence. To choose poverty is to embrace chains. To choose wealth is to embrace dominion. This is why wealth must be acquired at all costs, for the price of refusal is always greater than the burdens endured along the way. The pursuit of money also reshapes man's relationship with time itself. For the poor man, every hour is a chain, every day a repetition of labor bartered for survival, leaving no margin for reflection or creation. His time is sold cheaply, parceled into tasks that enrich others while draining his vitality. For the wealthy man, time expands, no longer consumed by necessity but directed by choice. He may invest hours in strategy, in learning, in pleasures that sharpen rather than blunt his will. Wealth converts time from tyrant into servant, and this transformation is the rarest of luxuries. To acquire money at all costs is therefore to purchase not only freedom of action, but mastery over the rhythm of life itself. This mastery of time grants the wealthy foresight, for he is not chained to today's hunger or tomorrow's rent, but can cast his vision years ahead, shaping outcomes while others merely scramble to endure the present. He prepares for famine before the harvest fails, for war before the first sword is drawn, for opportunity before others even recognize it. Poverty blinds by forcing attention to the immediate, while wealth illuminates the horizon by granting distance from desperation. The poor believe fortune is sudden, arbitrary, falling like lightning from the sky, but the wealthy know fortune is cultivated like a field, requiring patience, resources, and a span of vision that only wealth can secure. And see also how wealth magnifies reputation beyond measure. The poor man who fails is branded a fool, while the wealthy man who fails is excused as daring. The poor man's caution is condemned as cowardice, while the rich man's caution is praised as prudent. Success with money multiplies itself, for men are eager to believe in the authority of prosperity. Merchants grant credit to the wealthy without hesitation but scrutinize every coin from the poor, and opportunities are presented to the rich long before the poor even hear of them. Wealth becomes the proof men demand before offering loyalty or chance, and to acquire it at all costs is to ensure that one's reputation is not left to accident, but secured by the universal presumption that abundance signals competence. Wealth also alters the very nature of conflict, for while the poor man must fight directly, exposed and vulnerable, the wealthy man wages battle through proxies, contracts and influence, often without lifting a hand. Money buys distance from danger, placing buffers between the possessor and the hazard. Lawsuits are not won by justice alone, but by the ability to sustain counsel. Political struggles are not decided only by votes, but by the power to fund persuasion. And even personal feuds can be diverted when money commands allies willing to absorb the blow. Thus, wealth transforms struggle itself, turning survival into strategy and ensuring that the odds are tilted before the contest even begins. Yet one must also accept that wealth does not diminish envy. It multiplies it. To hold what others crave is to summon resentment, intrigue and schemes to strip advantage away, and this danger rises not only from the poor but from peers who covet one's position. For this reason, those who acquire money at all costs must also cultivate vigilance, for fortune without defenses is an invitation to predators. Envy is more dangerous than hunger, and the throne of wealth must always be guarded with Xerxes, fortified alliances and ruthless responses to betrayal. Many who rose quickly through fortune fell just as quickly through negligence, forgetting that the crown of riches demands constant defense. Still, the risks of wealth are far lighter than the humiliations of poverty. For while envy threatens the rich, contempt consumes the poor. The world listens to the wealthy even while plotting against them, but it silences the poor even while pitying them. Better then to be envied than forgotten. Better to guard treasure than to beg for crumbs. The mandate remains unchanged. Wealth must be acquired at all costs, for its burdens are lighter than the weight of helplessness, and its dangers are nobler than the degradations of need. The rich man may struggle to defend his crown, but the poor man is never granted one to defend. Wealth also reshapes the very texture of relationships, bending affection, loyalty, and even respect toward those who possess it. The poor man may love sincerely, yet his love often buckles beneath the strain of unmet needs, quarrels over scarcity, and the quiet humiliation of dependence. The wealthy man, by contrast, enters love from a place of abundance, able to provide security that strengthens affection rather than erodes it. Friendship, too, is transformed, for companions rally more eagerly to one who can offer opportunity rather than burden. Respect flows along the same current. The poor man must fight to earn it with every gesture, while the wealthy man receives it instinctively, often without effort. In this way, wealth is not only independence but magnetism itself, drawing to it loyalty, affection, and honor that the poor must struggle endlessly to obtain. It attracts, binds, and sustains in ways poverty never can. For wealth alone determines the tone of generosity. When the poor man gives, he is judged impractical, even foolish, for he sacrifices what little he has. But when the wealthy man gives, he is exalted as noble, magnanimous, even saintly, because he gives from surplus. Thus, money transforms the same act into two reputations, one mocked, the other praised. Charity itself requires wealth to endure, for the poor man's charity may feed a single mouth for a day, while the charity of the rich can sustain generations. This is why even the moralists who curse riches depend upon them for their causes, denouncing the wealthy in public while courting their favor in private. For they know the truth they cannot escape. Without wealth, even virtue dies in obscurity. Wealth also dictates the kind of freedom a man commands in speech. A poor man must weigh every word, for a careless offense may cost him a wage, a favor, or a fragile connection. His tongue is chained by necessity, his opinions stifled by fear of losing what little he possesses. A wealthy man, however, speaks boldly because no one can strip him easily of his position. He may criticize, command, or provoke, and his wealth shields him from the immediate consequences that silence others. Thus, wealth is not only freedom of body but freedom of tongue, and he who acquires it at all costs acquires the right to speak without trembling. Consider, too, the difference in legacy. A poor man may labor all his life with dignity, but his death erases his efforts within a single generation. His children inherit struggle. His name fades quickly. His works are forgotten. A wealthy man, however, extends his reach beyond the grave. His heirs inherit not only his gold but his position, his influence and his unfinished project. His name is carved into stone, his memory preserved in institutions he built or funded. Wealth alone secures remembrance, for history records not the hungry man's suffering, but the powerful man's mark upon the world. To acquire money at all costs, therefore, is to wage war against oblivion. Yet one must not mistake wealth for permanence, for it is a fire that must be tended, not a monument that stands untouched. Fortunes squandered by foolish heirs vanish as though they never existed, and dynasties collapse when discipline dies with the patriarch. Thus, to acquire money at all costs is only the first victory. The greater challenge is to preserve it across generations, requiring foresight, education, and the ruthless removal of weakness among those entrusted with inheritance. Wealth unguarded slips away like sound through open fingers, but wealth guarded with wisdom becomes an empire that endures. Ultimately, money at all costs is not only about survival, freedom, or comfort. It is about command. To live without it is to be commanded. There is no neutrality in this law, for the world recognizes only masters and servants, leaders and followers, creditors and debtors. Every man must choose his place, and wealth is the deciding factor. The poor man may dream of equality, but the wealthy man writes its terms. The poor man may dream of justice, but the wealthy man enforces it. To acquire money at all costs is to choose mastery over submission, authorship over anonymity, destiny over despair. Wealth shields a man from the petty humiliations that torment those without it. For the poor man must swallow insults in silence, knowing that protest might cost him the fragile security he clings to. He waits in lines, begs for opportunities, and endures indignities from those above him, because his lack of resources renders him powerless to resist. The wealthy man, however, moves to a different rhythm. He does not wait where others wait, nor beg where others beg, nor endure insults he does not wish to hear. Money constructs invisible walls around him, filtering out inconveniences and softening life's frictions. To acquire wealth at all costs, then, is to rise above the daily degradations that grind dignity into dust. Wealth also transforms ambition itself. For the poor, ambition is reduced to survival, eating, paying, avoiding ruin. Their dreams shrink to the size of their resources, and even hope becomes rationed. The wealthy, by contrast, are free to dream without restraint, for their foundation is secure. Their ambitions extend into conquest, innovation, and legacy. Wealth broadens the horizon, multiplying possibilities in every direction. This is why those who pursue money at all costs are often called ruthless, for their vision stretches where others dare not look, and their resources enable them to act while others merely fantasize. Wealth also creates silence around authority. The poor man must shout to be heard, and still his words carry little beyond his breath. But the wealthy man need only whisper, and his voice travels on the tongues of messengers, servants, and allies eager to align themselves with his power. His influence multiplies without effort, for money lends volume to command. Authority without wealth is fragile, built on goodwill, while authority with wealth is enduring, for it is enforced by necessity. Men listen not only out of respect, but because they must. Thus, money at all costs is not merely the acquisition of resources, but the amplification of one's voice until it echoes far beyond one's presence. Observe also how money bends justice. Courts may claim impartiality, but judgments are swayed by the strength of counsel, the duration of proceedings, and the patience of appeals, all of which require money to sustain. The poor man may be innocent, yet ruined by the cost of proving it, while the wealthy man may be guilty, yet shielded by his ability to delay, obscure, or negotiate his way to freedom. Justice, like loyalty, bends toward those who can afford to purchase time and representation. It is not fairness but reality. Money writes the terms by which law itself is applied, and to ignore this is to live in naivety, while to embrace it is to arm oneself properly in a world governed by appearances of fairness but sustained by wealth. Even in the realm of ideas, money proves decisive. A poor thinker may conceive brilliance, but without resources to print, promote, or protect his vision, it dies unheard. A wealthy thinker, or one backed by wealth, may spread even mediocrity across nations. Thus, wealth is not only the sustenance of bodies, but the engine of influence, dictating which ideas survive and which vanish. Truth does not prevail merely because it is true, it prevails when it is amplified, and amplification demands coin. To acquire money at all costs is therefore to acquire the means by which one's thoughts endure beyond one's life. Without it, even genius evaporates into silence. So, the law is unyielding. To possess wealth is to dictate the terms of existence, and to lack it is to suffer them. Every man is faced with this choice, though most deceive themselves into believing in neutrality. They claim they do not seek wealth, but in truth, they lack the discipline to endure its pursuit. They convince themselves that virtue alone is enough, but virtue without money becomes invisible. They declare contentment with little, but in reality they are bound by necessity, mistaking resignation for peace. It is better to admit the hunger, better to embrace the pursuit openly, better to acquire money at all costs, than to cloak impotence in the language of false virtue, for the world belongs not to those who wish, but to those who pay. Wealth dictates the rhythm of influence not only within one life, but across generations. A poor man may teach his children discipline, morality, and resilience, but these virtues often collapse when confronted by the unrelenting necessities of survival. His children must fight the same battles he fought, trapped in the cycle of scarcity as though bound by fate. A wealthy man, however, leaves not only lessons but foundations, equipping his heirs with the means to pursue greater ambitions unchained from hunger or debt. His wealth becomes the soil from which dynasties grow, granting continuity where the poor leave only broken beginnings. Thus, to acquire money at all costs is to wage war not only for oneself, but for bloodline and legacy, ensuring one's name does not vanish into the anonymity of poverty. This legacy explains why rulers, conquerors, and merchants sought treasuries beyond measure, for they knew that while battles may be won by strength, empires are secured by inheritance. A throne defended with valor collapses if the successor cannot finance loyalty, and an army that conquers today disbands tomorrow if the coffers run dry. Even the greatest ideas, movements, or revolutions crumble without wealth to sustain them after the first passion fades. Therefore, money is not merely the guarantor of present survival, it is the architect of permanence. To acquire it at all costs is to seize continuity in a world where time erases the unprepared. Wealth also reframes justice across generations. A poor family may remain righteous for centuries, yet their righteousness leaves no monuments, no schools, no foundations, no enduring testimony, and their goodness is forgotten as quickly as their graves are covered. A wealthy family, however, whether virtuous or not, inscribes itself into institutions that outlast lifetime. Their names are carved upon buildings, their influence embedded in politics, their presence etched into memory not because they were noble but because they were wealthy enough to preserve the illusion of nobility. History is not written by the good, nor even by the strong, but by those with the means to commission its telling. Wealth also distorts morality itself. The poor man who schemes for advantage is condemned as deceitful, while the wealthy man who schemes the same way is praised as shrewd. A poor man's ambition is called desperation, while a rich man's ambition is celebrated as vision. Thus, money sanctifies vice when wrapped in abundance and damns virtue when shackled by poverty. For men judge not by actions alone but by the results those actions produce, and wealth is the proof that silence is doubt. In this way, morality itself bends beneath the weight of money, for men accept as virtuous whatever the wealthy can afford to defend. Yet wealth's power to distort does not make it false. It makes it necessary, for in a world governed by appearances, the ability to shape appearances is the highest form of truth. And appearances cannot be shaped without resources. For the man who insists on living by pure virtue alone soon discovers that without wealth his virtue dies with him, unrecognized, unpreserved, and powerless to influence the world beyond his grave. To acquire money at all costs is therefore not to betray virtue but to preserve it, to arm it with the resources necessary to survive in a hostile reality. Those who scorn the pursuit of money betray not only themselves but their descendants, consigning their children to struggle, their names to obscurity, and their values to oblivion. To refuse wealth is to refuse continuity, to embrace mortality not only of the body but of the spirit. The man who acquires wealth at all costs ensures that his will endures beyond his flesh, shaping generations who will never meet him, and in this endurance lies the truest form of power, For the poor man's memory is buried with him while the wealthy man's shadow stretches long after death. In the final reckoning, wealth becomes the ultimate test of resolve, demanding clarity of purpose and the courage to endure costs that others flee. Every sacrifice made in its pursuit, sleep surrendered, comforts denied, friendships strained, transforms into the bricks of independence, while every indulgence avoided spares a man the humiliation of dependence. The poor often imagine that wealth is inherited, gifted or stolen, but they overlook the relentless labor and ruthless focus that lie beneath its surface. Fortune is not merely granted, it is seized, disciplined and defended. To acquire money at all costs is to embrace this truth without apology, that the price of freedom is always paid in advance. Wealth, once obtained, reveals its truest gift, not luxury but dominion, for luxury fades, consumed by appetite and forgotten in the endless hunger for more, while dominion endures, granting the power to bend circumstances and command respect without raising one's voice. The wealthy man does not need to plead, nor justify, for his resources stand as argument, proof and shield. Where others struggle to be believed, he is believed because he can afford to act. Where others pray to be spared hardship, he is spared because he can afford defenses. In this way, money is more than possession. It is protection, reputation and authority woven into one. But wealth is no resting place, for though pursuit may end, vigilance must begin. Fortune, once captured, must be guarded against the entropy of waste, the schemes of rivals, and the weakness of heirs. A wealthy man must train his lineage to bear the weight of possession, lest his empire dissolve in the hands of fools. To preserve wealth is a second conquest, requiring the same ruthlessness that first acquired it. Thus, money at all costs is not a single battle but a lifelong campaign, a war waged against complacency, extravagance and decay. For those who forget this law are devoured by the very riches they once celebrated. Yet despite its burdens, wealth remains far preferable to the slow suffocation of poverty. For poverty is not merely a condition of the body, but a corruption of the spirit. It bends the proud into servitude, silences the wise into obscurity and erases the noble into nothingness. Wealth, with all its dangers, at least permits choice, the choice of enemies, of allies, of destiny, while the poor man is forced into paths carved by others. To choose poverty is to surrender command. To choose wealth is to seize authorship of one's existence, and authorship is the very essence of power. History itself confirms this mandate. Kingdoms that fortified their treasuries endured, while those that neglected them collapsed despite courage and faith. Leaders who secured wealth are remembered as visionaries, while those who scorned it are remembered as victims. Even prophets and sages, whose words still echo across centuries, did not endure on virtue alone, but were preserved by patrons, institutions and treasuries that carried their message forward. Without wealth, even divinity is muted. With it, even mortality achieves immortality. Thus, money at all costs is not only the law of survival but the secret of remembrance. Therefore, let it be declared, wealth is not greed but sovereignty, not indulgence but insulation, not corruption but continuity. He who acquires money at all costs accepts the weight of vigilance, the envy of rivals, the ceaseless demand for discipline, but in exchange he receives command over time, authority over men, freedom from chains and the chance to etch his will into eternity. The poor man dies once when his body fails, but the wealthy man lives on, for his wealth preserves his shadow across generations. Choose then not the illusion of virtue without coin, but the truth of power with it. For in the end, only wealth allows a man to rise above circumstance, to master his fate, and to rule even from the grave. If you've read this far, it is because a part of you already knows this truth. Poverty is not humility. It is chains. Wealth is not greed. It is freedom. Without it, you will crawl. With it, you will command. Now, answer honestly. Are you ready to pay today's price to escape tomorrow's humiliation? Are you willing to suffer discipline now, so you never bow later? If this message touched you, if it made sense, then declare it openly. Say, I choose wealth. Let the world know how many are truly prepared to embrace sovereignty at all costs. And remember, keep watching the next lesson, for it holds more than you can yet imagine.